When I collapsed at work, the doctors called my wife. She never came. Instead, my wife's sister tagged me in a photo. Family day without the drama. I said nothing. Days later, still weak and hooked to machines, I saw 44 missed calls and a text from my wife and her dad. "We need you. Answer immediately." Without thinking twice, You know what's funny about dying? It doesn't give a damn about your PowerPoint presentation or whether you've hit your quarterly targets. Monday morning, 10:47 a.m. to be exact. Yeah, I remember because the digital clock on the conference room wall was the last thing I saw before my body decided to stage a full-scale rebellion right there in front of my boss and half the marketing department. 1 minute I'm clicking through slide 17 of Q3 revenue optimization strategies. Riveting stuff, really. And the next minute my chest feels like someone's using my ribcage as a punching bag while simultaneously wrapping a python around my lungs. My head started spinning like I'd just chugged a bottle of tequila at a frat party, except without any of the fun that usually comes before that kind of dizziness. "Johnson, you okay?" That was Peterson from accounting, probably more concerned about missing his lunch break than my imminent demise. "Real touching, Pete." I tried to answer, tried to play it cool like maybe I was just having an allergic reaction to our office's motivational posters or something, but my voice came out as this weird wheeze that sounded like a deflating balloon. Then the floor, that ugly beige carpet we'd all been complaining about for 3 years, suddenly rushed up to meet my face with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. Lights out. When I came to, I was staring up at those god-awful fluorescent hospital lights that make everyone look like extras in a zombie movie. You know the ones. They flicker just enough to make you question your sanity and cast shadows that would make a funeral director jealous. My chest felt like someone had parked a small car on it, and there were more wires attached to me than a Best Buy display model. "Welcome back," said this nurse with kind eyes and scrubs covered in cartoon cats. "Because nothing says professional medical care like Hello Kitty, right? You gave us quite a scare there, hon. You're lucky to be here." Lucky. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt lying there looking like a human Christmas tree with all those monitor wires. Real blessed. Then came Dr. Martinez, or was it Gonzalez? Hell, my brain was still doing somersaults, so let's just call him Dr. Serious Face. Guy had that look that doctors perfect in medical school, the one that says, "I'm about to deliver news that'll make your insurance premiums look like pocket change." "Mr. Johnson, you've suffered what we call a cardiac event," he said, consulting his clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "A serious one. Your heart essentially said nope and took an unscheduled vacation." Cardiac event. Gotta love medical terminology. They make it sound like your heart threw a surprise party instead of nearly killing you. But I got the message loud and clear. I'd had a heart attack at 34, which is about as appealing as finding out your favorite restaurant has been serving wrap burgers. "We've contacted your emergency contact," Dr. Serious Face continued. "Your wife, Clara. She should be here soon." Should be. Those two words hung in the air like a bad smell. Clara should be here. My wife of 6 years, the woman who promised to love me in sickness and in health. Remember that little gem from the wedding vows? Should be rushing through those hospital doors right about now. Probably crying and clutching a teddy bear or some flowers she grabbed from the gift shop. But here's the thing about should be. It's about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Night 1. Nothing. No Clara bursting through the door. No frantic phone calls asking about my condition. Just me, the beeping machines, and a steady rotation of nurses who kept checking if I needed anything. Yeah, I needed something all right. I needed my wife to give a damn that I'd nearly shuffled off this mortal coil. I kept staring at my phone like some lovesick teenager, willing it to buzz with a text, a call. Hell, even a carrier pigeon would have been something. The screen stayed as dead as my marriage apparently was. Day 2 rolled around, and still no sign of Clara. The young doctor, Dr. Ruiz, according to his name tag, kept patting my arm with that practiced sympathy they teach in Medical Bedside Manner 101. "Rest up, Mr. Johnson," he'd say. "Someone should be here soon. Someone should be here soon." There's that word again, should. It was starting to feel like a cruel joke, like expecting your GPS to work in a tunnel or believing politicians actually mean what they say during campaign season. The nurses tried to be encouraging. "Traffic's probably bad," suggested the one with the cat scrubs. "Maybe she's stuck at work," offered another. "Sure, Because nothing says loving spouse like prioritizing spreadsheets over your husband's coronary incident. I spent those first 2 days in a weird mental fog, partly from the medication and partly from the crushing realization that the person who was supposed to care most about whether I lived or died had apparently decided I wasn't worth the gas money to drive to the hospital. The other patients on my floor, and yeah, hospital walls are about as soundproof as tissue paper, had visitors constantly. Room 314 had so many flowers it looked like a funeral home exploded. Room 318's family brought enough food to feed a small army. Me? I got acquainted with every rerun of The Price is Right and became best friends with the vending machine down the hall. But here's what really got to me. It wasn't even anger I felt. You'd think I'd be furious, right? Ready to throw my Jell-O cup at the wall and demand answers. Instead, I felt this weird, hollow numbness, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and replaced it with cotton balls. Maybe that's what happens when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally proves that their love comes with more conditions than a cell phone contract. Maybe your brain just shuts down the disappointment center to prevent a complete system failure. By the end of day 2, I'd stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I'd stopped making excuses for Clara in my head. I'd stopped expecting anything at all. And you know what? That might have been the first healthy thing I'd done in years. The machines kept beeping, monitoring my vitals, making sure my heart kept doing its job despite the fact that it had apparently better instincts about my marriage than my brain did. Smart organ, the heart. Shame I hadn't listened to it sooner. But that was about to change. Day 3 in hotel hospital a lot, and I'm starting to feel like Tom Hanks in that movie where he's stuck on the island. Except instead of a volleyball named Wilson, I've got a heart monitor that beeps every time I think about how spectacularly my wife has failed at basic human decency. I'm lying there, counting ceiling tiles like some kind of demented mathematician. There are 247 of them, in case you're wondering, when my phone decides to finally make some noise. For about half a second, my stupid, optimistic heart does this little hopeful flutter that probably registered on every machine I'm hooked up to. Maybe it's Clara. Maybe she's been in some kind of accident herself, or maybe her phone died, or maybe she's been trapped under something heavy and just now managed to crawl to safety. You know, all those ridiculous scenarios your brain conjures up when someone you love acts like you've suddenly become invisible. But no. Oh, hell no. It's Instagram. Because of course it is. In an age where people document their breakfast like they're running for office, why would a little thing like their family member nearly dying interrupt their social media schedule? The notification reads, "At Felicity Jones tagged you in a photo." Felicity, that's Clara's younger sister, the one who thinks influencer is a real job and that taking pictures of her avocado toast constitutes contributing to society. She's got about as much depth as a puddle in August, but hey, at least she's consistent. I tap the notification with the kind of morbid curiosity you get when you drive past a car accident. You know it's going to be bad, but you just can't look away. And there it is, in all its filtered, Valencia-tinted glory, a perfect little family tableau that looks like it came straight out of a Hallmark commercial. There's Felicity, blonde hair catching the sunlight just so, wearing one of those flowy sundresses that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Next to her is Clara, my wife. Remember her? Looking radiant and carefree in a way I haven't seen in months. But wait, there's more. Because standing behind them like some kind of suburban patriarchal statue are Clara's parents, Robert and Margaret. Robert's got his arm around Margaret, both of them beaming with the kind of joy you'd expect from people who just won the lottery, not people whose son-in-law is currently cosplaying as a human pincushion in the cardiac unit. The setting is picture-perfect too, because of course it is. They're at Clearwater Lake, about 2 hours north of the city, the place where Clara and I had our first anniversary picnic. Remember that, honey? When we were still pretending we liked each other. There's a red checkered blanket spread out on the grass, a wicker basket that probably came from some boutique that charges $50 for a rustic charm, and enough gourmet sandwiches and artisanal beverages to feed a small European country. The caption. Oh, the caption is where Felicity really shows her true colors. In her signature mix of basic girl aesthetic and casual cruelty, she's written, "Family Day, without the drama 2 heart sparkles, sometimes you need to surround yourself with people who lift you up." Hashtag blessed, hashtag family time, hashtag no filter needed, hashtag lake life, hashtag drama free. But here's the real kicker. The thing that makes me want to rip these heart monitor wires off and use them to strangle someone. They tagged me. Actually tagged me in this monument to their collective sociopathy. Like they wanted me to see it. Like they wanted me to know that while I was lying in a hospital bed, wondering if my ticker was going to give up the ghost permanently, they were out there living their best life without the inconvenience of my near-death experience cramping their style. I stare at this digital middle finger for a solid 5 minutes, my brain trying to process what I'm looking at. The timestamp says the photo was posted about 2 hours ago, which means they were out there having their little family bonding session right around the time Dr. Ruiz was explaining to me that I'd need to make some significant lifestyle changes if I wanted to see 40. The comments section is exactly what you'd expect from Felicity's followers. A parade of heart eye emojis and squad goals. And you guys are so cute. Because nothing says cute like abandoning your family member in their hour of need to go have a photo shoot by the lake. But then I scroll down a little further and see something that makes my blood pressure spike so high I'm surprised it doesn't trigger every alarm in the ICU. One of Clara's cousins, I think it's Jessica or maybe Jennifer, one of those J names that all sound the same, has commented, "Where's Johnson?" Face with tears of joy. And Felicity, sweet, thoughtful Felicity, has responded with a laughing crying emoji and the words, "He's taking some time to work on himself, flexed biceps, we're supporting his journey." Folded hands. My journey. My fucking journey. Like I chose to have a heart attack. Like I decided, you know what would be fun? Let me nearly die on a Monday morning and see if anyone gives a shit. I screenshot the whole thing, because at this point I'm collecting evidence like I'm building a case, though I'm not sure what kind of case you can build against people for being heartless pieces of human garbage. Is there a court for crimes against basic decency? Can you sue someone for being a sociopath with a smartphone? The worst part, and there are so many parts to choose from, it's like a sampler platter of awful, is that I can picture exactly how this went down. Clara probably got the call from the hospital while she was getting ready for work. Maybe she paused for a whole 30 seconds, considering whether she should come check on her husband who'd just had a cardiac event. Then Felicity probably called with some crisis about her boutique or her latest social media strategy, and suddenly my medical emergency became this inconvenient speed bump in their family fun day planning. I can hear the conversation now. "Oh my God, Clara, we can't cancel our lake day because Johnson had some kind of episode. He's probably fine. You know how dramatic he gets. Besides, this is the perfect lighting for my feed, and Margaret brought those cute vintage mason jars. And Clara, my dear wife Clara, probably nodded along because God forbid she miss out on being part of Felicity's latest attempt at Instagram fame. Because that's what really matters here, making sure the family brand stays strong while the actual family member withers away in a hospital bed. The ache in my chest isn't just from the heart attack anymore. It's something deeper, something that makes the physical pain feel like a paper cut compared to the realization that the people I thought loved me have been treating me like an optional side character in their lives. I set my phone down and stare back up at those ceiling tiles, but now I'm not counting them. I'm thinking about how sometimes the universe has a funny way of showing you exactly where you stand with people. Sometimes it takes nearly dying to realize that to some people, you were never really living in their world anyway. Something inside me shifts that day. Not breaks. Breaking would be too dramatic, too sudden. It's more like something just shuts down. Quietly. Permanently. For days into my involuntary staycation at St. Mary's Hospital for the emotionally and physically broken, I'd settled into what the staff probably called acceptance, but what I preferred to think of as strategic numbness. You know that feeling when you've been punched in the gut so many times that your body just stops registering the pain? Yeah, that's where I was living now. In the sweet, sweet land of emotional anesthesia, where Instagram posts about family picnics and absent wives couldn't touch me because I'd officially run out of fucks to give. I'd made friends with Jorge, the night janitor who spoke broken English but had a PhD in reading people's bullshit. He'd taken one look at my visitor-less room and started bringing me decent coffee from the staff break room instead of that watered-down swill they served to patients. We didn't talk much, language barrier and all, but sometimes the best therapy is just having someone acknowledge that your situation sucks without trying to fix it or explain it away. Dr. Ruiz had been checking on me more frequently too, probably because he'd noticed that my emergency contact was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. He'd started asking careful questions about my support system at home, which is medical speak for, why the hell is nobody visiting this poor bastard? I'd gotten pretty good at deflecting those conversations with jokes about being a social butterfly who just preferred his alone time. Real convincing stuff. But then my phone decided to have a goddamn seizure. I was half asleep, drifting in that weird hospital twilight zone where the morphine makes everything feel like you're watching your life through someone else's eyes, when the buzzing started. Not just one buzz or two, but this relentless, angry vibrating that sounded like a pissed-off wasp trapped in a mason jar. At first, I thought it was one of the machines malfunctioning. Wouldn't be the first time some piece of medical equipment decided to throw a tantrum while I was connected to it. But no. It was my phone, lighting up like a Christmas tree in Times Square, except instead of spreading holiday cheer, it was broadcasting what looked like a full-scale panic attack from area code 847. 44 missed calls. 44. I counted them twice because surely that couldn't be right. Who the hell calls someone 44 times in the span of 2 hours? The answer, apparently, was my loving wife and her dear old dad, Robert. You know, the same people who'd been too busy having lakeside picnics to check if I was still breathing for the past 4 days. But now, apparently, they needed me with the urgency of a SWAT team responding to a hostage situation. The calls had started around 2 p.m. and just kept coming like some kind of digital tsunami. Clara, Robert, Clara, Robert, Clara again. A perfect ping-pong match of desperation bouncing back and forth between the two people who'd apparently just remembered I existed. The call log read like a horror movie where the phone calls are coming from inside the house. Except in this case, they were coming from inside my marriage, and they were about 4 days too fucking late. Then came the text message. Not messages, plural, like normal human beings would send when they're trying to reach someone. Just one single, perfectly crafted message that managed to say everything and nothing at the same time. We need you. Answer immediately. That was it. No, how are you feeling? No, sorry we haven't been in touch. No, hope you're not dead in a ditch somewhere. Just a demand, wrapped up in the kind of tone you'd use to summon a dog who'd wandered too far from the yard. We need you. Answer immediately. Like I was some kind of customer service hotline they could call when their life wasn't working the way they wanted it to. And here's the beautiful irony. It came from both of them. A group text from Clara and Robert, because apparently they'd coordinated this little intervention like they were planning a military operation. Probably sat around that same picnic table where they'd been celebrating their drama-free family time and decided that maybe, just maybe, they needed their personal ATM back online. I stared at that message for what felt like an hour, but was probably only about 5 minutes. The audacity was almost impressive. 4 days of radio silence while I lay in a hospital bed wondering if my ticker was going to give up entirely. And now they were hitting me with "we need you," like I was the asshole for not being available. Like I'd been screening their calls while getting my chest cracked open and my arteries inspected by people with medical degrees. The funny thing, and by funny I mean soul-crushingly ironic, was how calm I felt reading it. You'd think 44 missed calls from your wife would send your heart rate through the roof, especially when said heart had recently tried to quit its day job. But instead, I felt this weird, almost zen-like detachment. Like I was reading someone else's drama, watching some other poor bastard's marriage implode in real time. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in probably 5 years. My grandfather Elias. My mom's dad. The one who'd taught me how to fish and how to spot bullshit from a mile away. Though he'd probably roll over in his grave if he knew how badly I'd forgotten that second lesson. He'd been the one person in my family who'd never asked me for anything, never made me feel like my value was tied to what I could provide or fix or pay for. I hadn't called him since. Christ, when was the last time? Maybe Christmas 2 years ago? Clara had always found excuses why we couldn't visit him. Too far away, not enough time. He lived in that tiny apartment that smelled like old books and pipe tobacco. She'd wrinkled her nose every time I mentioned him, like he was some embarrassing relic from my past that she'd prefer to keep buried. But sitting there in that hospital bed, staring at 44 missed calls and a text message that treated me like a malfunctioning appliance, I found myself scrolling through my contacts until I found his number. Elias Morrison, listed right there between emergency plumber and Frank from accounting, like he was just another service provider instead of the one person who'd ever loved me without expecting anything in return. My hands were shaking, and this time it wasn't from the medication. As I hit the call button, it rang once, twice, and then, like some kind of miracle in a world that had been fresh out of them lately, I heard his voice. Hello. Same gravelly tone I remembered, like he'd been smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey since the Carter administration, which he probably had. Grandpa. My voice cracked like I was 13 again, calling him after getting beat up at school. It's me. It's your grandson. There was a pause, and for a second I thought maybe he didn't remember me. Maybe too much time had passed. Maybe I'd burned that bridge too when I'd let Clara convince me that family obligations were just another form of drama to be avoided. But then he said, "Which hospital?" Just like that. No questions about why I was calling after years of silence. No demands for explanations or apologies. Just, which hospital? Like he'd been waiting by the phone for exactly this call. Like he'd known somehow that eventually I'd need someone who gave a damn whether I lived or died. And within an hour, one fucking hour, compared to 4 days of nothing from my wife, he was there. When Elias walked into my hospital room, it was like watching a man step out of a time machine from when people actually gave a shit about each other. He was wearing the same old brown leather jacket I remembered from my childhood, the one that probably cost him a week's pay back in 1987, but had lasted through 3 decades of Chicago winters. His shoes were worn but polished, the kind of dress shoes that working-class guys wore to church on Sundays and job interviews on Mondays. Everything about him screamed old school in the best possible way. The first thing he did was look me dead in the eye, not at the machines, not at the charts hanging at the foot of my bed, but right at me, like he was checking to make sure I was still in there somewhere underneath all the medical equipment and emotional wreckage. Then he pulled up that uncomfortable plastic chair that every hospital room comes equipped with and sat down like he had all the time in the world. "You look like hell," he said, which was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to me in days. No sugarcoating, no false cheerfulness, just straight-up assessment from someone who'd seen enough of life to know that sometimes people look like hell because they feel like hell. Thanks, Grandpa. Really know how to make a guy feel better about his near-death experience. He chuckled, this dry, raspy sound that reminded me of autumn leaves crunching under your feet. "Son, if you wanted someone to blow sunshine up your ass, you should have called your wife." Ouch. But also, fair point. What happened next was peak Elias Morrison efficiency. While I'd been lying there for 4 days feeling sorry for myself and counting ceiling tiles, he spent exactly 30 minutes asking the right questions, the ones the doctors should have been hearing from my wife. What were my symptoms before the attack? Had I been under unusual stress? Was I taking any medications they should know about? What was my family medical history? You know, basic shit that might be relevant when someone's ticker decides to stage a revolt. But here's the kicker. Clara could have answered exactly 0 of those questions. She didn't know that my dad had died of a heart attack at 52. She didn't know that I'd been having chest pains for weeks, but had been too busy covering her sister's boutique rent to see a doctor. She didn't even know what medications I was allergic to, which is kind of important information when they're pumping you full of cardiac drugs. But Elias knew. He'd been paying attention for 67 years while everyone else had been treating me like a walking credit card with legs. Then he quietly excused himself and came back an hour later with paperwork. Turns out, my insurance had been playing the classic, let's deny coverage and hope this poor bastard dies before he can appeal, game with some tests the cardiologist wanted to run. Standard operating procedure for American healthcare: delay, deny, deflect, and pray the problem resolves itself permanently. Elias didn't argue with them or threaten to call lawyers or make a scene like Clara probably would have. He just pulled out his checkbook, an actual paper checkbook, because the man still balanced his accounts by hand like a civilized human being, and wrote a check for the full amount. Just like that. Problem solved. Grandpa, you can't. I can and I did. Shut up and let them run the test. But that wasn't even the real bombshell. Oh no, the universe was just getting warmed up. After the nurses left, and we had some privacy, Elias pulled out his tablet, because despite being 74, the man was more tech-savvy than half the millennials I worked with, and said those 4 words that would change everything. Let's look at your finances. Now, I thought I knew where my money went. I made decent cash, lived in a nice house, drove a reliable car. Sure, things were tight sometimes, But that's just modern life, right? Everyone's broke, everyone's stressed, everyone's one medical emergency away from financial ruin. That's the American dream, baby. Wrong. So fucking wrong it wasn't even funny. Elias had somehow, and I'm still not entirely sure how he managed this without access to my accounts, mapped out every single financial thread connecting me to Clara's family. It was like watching someone perform an autopsy on your bank account, except instead of finding a cause of death, they found a cause of slow, methodical bleeding. 5 accounts. 5 separate accounts that I'd somehow forgotten about or never really paid attention to, all tied to my name, all feeding money to various members of the Martinez family, like some kind of financial foredrip. Clara's personal checking account, which I'd added myself to for emergencies, and which she'd been using for her daily Starbucks habit and Target runs. The business account for Felicity's boutique, which I'd co-signed for just until she got established 3 years ago. A credit line for Robert's perpetually failing home improvement projects. Even a fucking auto insurance policy that covered Clara's car, Felicity's car, and Margaret's ancient Honda. Jesus Christ, I whispered, staring at the numbers on his tablet screen. How did I not know about all this? Because they made sure you didn't know? Elias said matter-of-factly. Look here, Felicity's boutique rent gets automatically deducted from your business account on the 15th of every month. Has been for 3 years. You've been paying for her to play dress-up shop while she posts Instagram photos about being a girl boss entrepreneur. The rent alone was $1,500 a month. $1,500 every month for 3 years. That was $54,000 I'd unknowingly invested in my sister-in-law's delusion that she was the next big thing in overpriced scarves and motivational jewelry. But wait, there's more. Clara's car insurance, which I'd thought was maybe $200 a month, was actually covering 3 vehicles because family helps family, and I was apparently the designated family ATM. Robert's mortgage had gone into default twice in the past year, and both times, mystery payments had appeared from accounts linked to my name, saving their perfect suburban house from foreclosure. Holy shit, I said, scrolling through transaction after transaction. I've been carrying all of them. This whole time, I've been paying for their entire lifestyle. Elias leaned back in his chair and sighed, the kind of deep, world-weary sigh that comes from watching someone you care about finally wake up to reality. Son, they don't love you. They use you. 6 words. 6 simple words that cut through 8 years of marriage, 8 years of trying to be the good husband, the reliable provider, the guy who never complained when money got tight because he was too busy making sure everyone else was comfortable. They don't love you. They use you. And sitting there in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines that were keeping track of my broken heart, I finally understood why it had tried to quit in the first place. It wasn't the stress of work or the long hours or the shitty corporate politics. It was the slow, steady realization that I'd been living my entire adult life as someone else's financial plan, someone else's backup option, someone else's safety net. I wasn't a husband to Clara. I wasn't a brother-in-law to Felicity. I wasn't a son-in-law to Robert and Margaret. I was a walking wallet with a pulse, and apparently not even a very reliable pulse at that. That night, while the nurses did their rounds and the machines beeped out their electronic lullabies, Elias and I began cutting the cords. One by one, account by account, automatic payment by automatic payment. It was like performing surgery on my own financial life, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. If you've ever wanted to see what happens when you cut off the financial life support to a family of professional parasites, let me tell you, it's like watching a nature documentary about what happens when the watering hole dries up in the middle of the savannah. Except instead of graceful gazelles migrating to greener pastures, you get a bunch of grown-ass adults having public meltdowns because their personal ATM suddenly grew a spine. The reaction was so immediate you'd have thought I'd detonated a nuclear bomb in their perfectly curated suburban lives. I'm talking less than 24 hours from the time Elias and I started canceling automatic payments and closing accounts, and my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree on steroids. But this time, instead of feeling that familiar anxiety when Clara's name popped up on my screen, I felt something that was either enlightenment or the lingering effects of cardiac medication. Either way, it was liberating as hell. Clara's voicemail came first, and oh boy, was it a masterpiece of entitled indignation wrapped up in that fake, concerned wife voice she'd perfected over the years. You know the tone. The one that sounds like she's talking to a particularly slow child who's just colored outside the lines for the 100th time. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, she started, because apparently having a heart attack and nearly dying was just me being dramatic for attention. But cutting off the accounts? Really? That's your solution? I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the way to handle whatever midlife crisis you're having. You're being incredibly selfish right now, and frankly, it's embarrassing. I've been trying to give you space to deal with your issues, but this is crossing a line. Call me back. We need to talk like adults. Like adults. Right. Because nothing says adult conversation like completely ignoring your spouse for 4 days while he's in the hospital and then lecturing him about responsibility when the money stops flowing. The sheer fucking audacity was almost impressive. But Clara's voicemail was just the opening act. The real show started when Felicity's text came through, and I swear to God, it was like watching someone's entire personality collapse in real time. No cutesy emojis, no inspirational quotes, no hashtags about being blessed and grateful. Just raw, unfiltered panic from someone who'd just realized their entire business model was about to implode. My account balance is $19. Fix this. That was it. No, how are you feeling? No, hope you're recovering well. Just a bank balance and a demand, like I was customer service for her life. $19. That's what 3 years of playing entrepreneur had gotten her without daddy-in-law bankrolling the whole operation. $19 fucking dollars and a boutique full of scarves that probably cost more to make than they'd ever sell for. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who'd been posting Instagram stories about building an empire and living that boss babe life, while I'd been unknowingly covering her rent, utilities, insurance, and probably her daily iced coffee habit. Now she was down to grocery money, and suddenly I was supposed to drop everything and fix this, like her financial incompetence was somehow my emergency. But wait, there's more. Because Robert, dear old Robert, who'd been too busy enjoying his drama-free family picnic to visit his son-in-law in the hospital, decided to chime in with his own special brand of guilt trip masquerading as fatherly wisdom. You're destroying everything we built together. This family has been through enough without you throwing some kind of tantrum because you had a health scare. We're all here for you, but you have to meet us halfway. You can't just burn everything down because you're upset. Everything we built together. Let that marinate for a minute. According to Robert, the man who'd contributed exactly $0 and even less emotional support to any aspect of my life, we had built something together. Apparently, my money and their spending habits constituted some kind of collaborative effort that I was now selfishly destroying by having the nerve to control my own finances. And the health scare comment? Chef's kiss. Nothing minimizes a cardiac event quite like calling it a scare, like I'd been startled by a spider instead of having my heart literally try to quit its day job. Real sensitive stuff from the man who couldn't be bothered to visit me in the hospital but could find time to lecture me about family loyalty via text message. But here's where it gets really good. And by good, I mean so pathetically predictable that I actually started laughing in my hospital bed, which probably made the nurses think the morphine had finally kicked in properly. Within 48 hours of the money getting cut off, Clara's family went from family day without the drama to full-scale social media meltdown mode. They posted a video, an actual, honest-to-God video of their house, completely stripped bare after an eviction notice. Empty rooms, boxes scattered around. That particular brand of chaos that happens when the sheriff shows up and gives you 24 hours to get your shit together. Felicity was behind the camera, and you could hear her voice shaking as she filmed room after room of their former middle-class paradise. They took everything, she narrated, like she was documenting some kind of natural disaster instead of the completely predictable consequences of their own financial irresponsibility. Everything we worked for, everything we built, gone. The caption was even better. They took everything. Guess who let them? With a broken heart emoji and tags for family support groups, as if they were victims of some cosmic injustice instead of people who'd been living beyond their means for years on someone else's dime. But here's the thing that really got me. The thing that made me realize just how deep their delusion ran. They genuinely seemed to believe that the bank had stolen their house. Like some mustache-twirling villain in a black hat had shown up and arbitrarily decided to ruin their lives for shits and giggles. They were playing the victim so hard you'd think they'd been struck by lightning instead of being served an eviction notice for not paying their mortgage. Except I knew the truth. Thanks to Elias and his magical tablet of financial revelation, I knew exactly where their mortgage payments had gone for the past year. Robert had been using the mortgage money to fund Felicity's boutique inventory and Margaret's medical bills. They'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Peter was their own housing security and Paul was a failing business that sold overpriced accessories to women going through their own midlife crises. The bank hadn't stolen their house. They'd gambled it away, lost, and then acted shocked when the house always wins. They'd taken a perfectly good suburban home, paid for, incidentally, with a down payment that came from yours truly as a wedding gift to Clara, and turned it into collateral for their daughter's entrepreneurial fantasies. And now they wanted me to feel guilty about it. They wanted me to see that video of their empty house and their crocodile tears and rush back into the fold with my checkbook open and my mouth shut, ready to fix everything like I always had before. But lying there in that hospital bed, watching their perfectly orchestrated pity party play out on my phone screen, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolutely fucking nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desperate need to swoop in and save the day. Just a calm, clear understanding that this was what accountability looked like when it finally caught up with people who'd been avoiding it their whole lives. You know that moment in horror movies when you think the monster is finally dead, and then its hand shoots up through the dirt for one last scare? Yeah, well, welcome to my life, where the monster was my wife's family, and they were about to pull some next-level psychotic bullshit that would make Stephen King proud. I was actually starting to feel human again. The docs had cleared me for discharge in a couple days. My chest wasn't feeling like someone had parked a semi on it. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night without my brain spinning through endless lists of bills and obligations and who needed what money when. Turns out, when you're not financially responsible for 4 other adults and their various catastrophes, life gets a lot less stressful. Who knew? Elias had been coming by every day, not because he felt obligated or because I was paying him to be there, but because that's what actual family does. We'd been working through the remaining financial loose ends, canceling the last few automatic payments, transferring accounts, basically performing surgery on 8 years of financial entanglement. It felt like detoxing from a drug I didn't even know I'd been addicted to. That's when he walked in with an envelope. Now, Elias wasn't the dramatic type. He didn't do grand gestures or mysterious presentations. When he had something to tell you, he just told you. But this time, he looked like he'd aged about 5 years overnight, and he was carrying that envelope like it contained anthrax or divorce papers or some other form of weaponized misery. "Son," he said, settling into that plastic chair that had basically become his personal throne, "we need to talk about what your wife's family is really up to." He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of printed emails. Not forwarded emails or screenshots, but actual printed copies that someone had gone through the trouble of obtaining through what I could only assume were less than legal means. Elias had always been resourceful, but this was some next-level private investigator shit. "How did you? Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," he said, which was probably the most badass thing a 74-year-old man in a cardigan had ever said in the history of cardigans. The emails were between Clara, Robert, and someone named Marcus Hoffman from Hoffman and Associates Legal Services. And let me tell you, reading them was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train was my entire life and the wreck was happening in real time while I'd been unconscious in a hospital bed. The first email, dated just 2 days after my heart attack, was from Robert to this Hoffman guy, with Clara CC'd. The subject line alone made my blood pressure monitor start beeping like a smoke alarm. "Emergency guardianship consultation, urgent." "Mr. Hoffman," Robert had written, "as we discussed on the phone, my son-in-law has had a serious cardiac event and is currently hospitalized. His behavior since the incident has been increasingly erratic and concerning. He's made several irrational financial decisions that are putting his family's security at risk, and we're worried about his mental state. We need to explore options for temporary guardianship to protect his assets and ensure he gets the help he needs. Erratic behavior, irrational financial decisions, mental state. These motherfuckers were trying to have me declared incompetent because I'd stopped paying their bills. They were literally attempting to get legal control over my finances by claiming that cutting them off was evidence of mental illness. The next email, from Clara, was even better. She'd laid out a whole timeline of my supposed deteriorating mental health, starting with my decision to stop automatic payments and including such damning evidence as refusing to answer phone calls and isolating himself from family. According to my loving wife, my behavior over the past week had been so concerning that she feared for my safety and the safety of our financial future. Our financial future. Right. Because apparently, Clara's boutique funding and Robert's house payment gambling habits were integral parts of my financial future. But here's where it gets really fucking evil. They'd found a lawyer who specialized in emergency guardianships for people with diminished capacity due to medical events. Apparently, it's a thing. When someone has a stroke or severe illness or, say, a cardiac event, concerned family members can petition the court to take control of their finances if they can prove the person isn't thinking clearly. The lawyer had laid out the whole strategy in his response email. They'd need medical documentation of my heart attack, witness statements about my erratic behavior, and evidence that I was making financial decisions that went against my established patterns. The goal was temporary guardianship, just long enough to restore financial stability and ensure proper medical care. Translation: just long enough to get back control of my bank accounts and credit lines so they could continue bleeding me dry while I recovered from nearly dying. This is their nuclear option, Elias said, watching me read through email after email of their carefully planned scheme. When the crying and guilt trips didn't work, when the social media pity party didn't bring you running back with your checkbook open, they decided to just take legal control. I kept reading, my hands shaking, and this time it wasn't for medication or heart problems. It was pure, concentrated rage. They'd spent more time planning this legal maneuver than they'd spent visiting me in the hospital. They'd put more effort into researching guardianship laws than they'd put into asking how I was feeling or whether I was going to live through this. The most insidious part was how legitimate they'd made it sound. Reading their emails, you'd think they were genuinely concerned family members trying to help a beloved relative who'd clearly lost his mind after a traumatic medical event. They'd even found character witnesses, Margaret's sister, who barely knew me, and some neighbor who'd apparently noticed that I'd been withdrawn and antisocial lately. Withdrawn and antisocial. Yeah, probably because I'd been working myself into a heart attack to pay for everyone else's lifestyle, while my wife treated me like an inconvenient roommate who occasionally provided money. But the cherry on top of this shit Sunday was Clara's final email to the lawyer. We just want what's best for him. He's not thinking clearly right now, and we're worried he's going to destroy everything we've worked so hard to build together. If we can just get temporary control until he's stable again, we can make sure he gets the help he needs and protect our family's future. Our family's future. There it was again, that beautiful delusion that their financial security was somehow my responsibility, that their poor decisions were my emergency, that their comfort was worth more than my autonomy. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could legally steal my money. They were going to use my heart attack, the medical emergency they'd been too busy to acknowledge, as evidence that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own finances. They were going to turn my recovery into their opportunity. The hearing's scheduled for next week, Elias said quietly. They filed the petition yesterday. I looked up from the emails, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The sheer scope of their betrayal was breathtaking. These weren't just greedy relatives trying to guilt me into opening my wallet again. These were people who were willing to have me declared legally incompetent, to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, my basic human dignity, just to keep their money train running. What do we do? I asked, though I already knew Elias wouldn't have brought me this information without having a plan. He smiled then, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who'd been around long enough to know exactly how to fight dirty when the situation called for it. We get ahead of this, he said, pulling out his phone. I've already called your lawyer. By tomorrow morning, you'll have cease and desist orders filed against all of them, account freezes to prevent any unauthorized access, and legal protections that'll make this guardianship petition look like what it really is, a money grab from people who never gave a damn about your well-being. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something that might have been hope. Or maybe it was just the satisfaction of knowing that finally, Someone was fighting for me instead of fighting to use me. When the legal nuclear option failed, because apparently having a lawyer who actually gave a shit about his client is more effective than having a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse disguised as family concern, Clara's clan decided to pivot to their backup plan. Destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I'd crawl back to them just to make it stop. It was like watching a masterclass in manipulation, except instead of being impressed, I was getting a front row seat to just how low people will go when their meal ticket gets a conscience. The whole thing started innocently enough, which should have been my first red flag. When has anything involving Felicity ever been innocent? She posted what looked like a simple selfie. No fancy filter, no perfect lighting, just her sitting in what appeared to be her car, looking like she'd been crying for about 3 hours straight. Which, knowing Felicity's relationship with waterproof mascara, probably meant she'd been practicing in the mirror for 3 hours to get the perfect, devastated, but still photogenic look. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive emotional manipulation. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones going through the hardest times. When someone you care about is hurting, they might lash out at the people trying to help them. All we can do is send love and hope they find their way back to the family that's always been there for them. Hashtag family first, hashtag love wins, hashtag praying for healing. No names mentioned, of course. Felicity was way too smart to come right out and say my brother-in-law is having a psychotic break and destroying our family, but she didn't need to. Anyone who'd been following their social media drama for the past week would know exactly who she was talking about. It was like a subtweet, but with the emotional manipulation cranked up to 11 and a side of Jesus hashtags for good measure. But that was just the opening shot. The real campaign began when Clara reposted it with her own edition. A broken heart emoji and the words, "Some battles are fought in private, but love always wins in the end. Praying for my husband's healing, body, mind, and spirit." Red heart, broken heart, folded hands. Body, mind, and spirit. Like I was some kind of triple threat of dysfunction that needed divine intervention to function properly. Like my decision to stop funding their lifestyle was a symptom of mental illness rather than a long overdue reality check. Within hours, the post had been shared by Margaret, by Robert, by cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, by neighbors who probably couldn't pick me out of a police lineup, but were suddenly deeply concerned about my well-being. The comments section turned into a prayer circle meets intervention planning committee, with everyone offering their thoughts and prayers for my recovery, and their support for my brave wife, who was standing by her man during this difficult time. Brave wife. The woman who'd been too busy having lakeside picnics to visit me in the hospital was now being celebrated as some kind of saint for putting up with her clearly unstable husband. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at their next drama-free family gathering. But Felicity wasn't done. Oh no, this was just Act 1 of her one-woman show titled How to Destroy Someone's Reputation Using Instagram Stories and Crocodile Tears. Act 2 came in the form of a video, a shaky, handheld masterpiece that looked like it had been filmed during an earthquake, but was probably just Felicity's hands trembling from the emotional weight of her performance. The video showed her sitting in what I eventually recognized as her car parked outside their old house, the one they'd lost because they'd been using the mortgage payments to fund her boutique fantasies. Piano music played softly in the background, because nothing says genuine emotion quite like a carefully curated soundtrack. "I don't usually do this," she began, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. "But sometimes you have to speak your truth, even when it's hard. Sometimes loved ones lash out when they're hurting. Sometimes the people we're trying to help the most are the ones who push us away the hardest." She paused here, wiping away a perfectly timed tear that had somehow managed not to smudge her makeup. Professional-level emotional manipulation right there. "We've all been through so much lately as a family," she continued. "And when someone you love is struggling, when they're dealing with health issues and stress and all the things that life throws at us, sometimes they make decisions that hurt the people who love them most. But that doesn't mean you stop loving them. That doesn't mean you give up on them. Health issues and stress. Right. Because having a heart attack because you've been working yourself to death to pay for other people's poor financial decisions is just stress. Because cutting off their access to your bank accounts after they've been bleeding you dry for years is just a symptom of not handling pressure well." The video went on like that for about 5 minutes. Felicity painting herself and her family as the long-suffering victims of my inexplicable cruelty, hinting just enough at my health issues to make it clear that I wasn't thinking straight, but never quite saying anything that could be used against her legally. It was like watching a politician give a non-apology apology, except instead of a sex scandal, it was about me having the audacity to control my own finances. Clara reposted the video with another broken heart emoji and the caption, "My heart breaks for our whole family right now. Praying for healing and restoration." Broken heart folded hands hashtag standing in faith. And just like that, the narrative was set. I wasn't a man who'd nearly died and then discovered that his wife's family had been systematically draining his finances for years. I was a sick man who was lashing out at the people who loved him most. I wasn't someone who'd finally grown a spine and started setting boundaries. I was someone who was struggling and making decisions that hurt the people who love him most. The response was immediate and exactly what they'd been hoping for. My phone started buzzing with texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, all wanting to check in and make sure I was okay. Cousins from Clara's side of the family, co-workers who'd seen the posts, even my old college roommate, who'd somehow gotten tagged in the whole mess. "Hey man, saw Clara's post. You doing all right? If you need to talk, I'm here. Thinking of you during this difficult time. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Praying for your family. Hope you guys can work through whatever's going on." For a hot minute, I actually started to doubt myself. When you've got dozens of people reaching out with concern for your mental health, when your own wife is publicly praying for your healing, when your sister-in-law is making tearful videos about how worried she is about you, it starts to mess with your head. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe cutting them off financially really was a sign that I wasn't thinking clearly. But then something beautiful happened. Someone, and I still don't know who, but I owe them a beer and possibly my firstborn child, screenshot Felicity's old Instagram post. You know, the one from the family picnic. The one with the caption, "Family Day without the drama." Some with face red heart hashtag blessed hashtag family time hashtag lake life hashtag no negativity. They posted it as a comment on Felicity's crying video with the simple caption, "Interesting timing." And just like that, the whole house of cards came tumbling down. Because suddenly, people started doing the math. Felicity posts about having a drama-free family day without me while I'm in the hospital. A week later, she's making videos about how much she loves and worries about me. Clara's celebrating my absence from family functions, then positioning herself as the devoted wife standing by her struggling husband. The screenshots spread faster than gossip at a church potluck. People started connecting the dots, asking questions, pointing out the timeline. The comments on their posts shifted from sympathy to suspicion. "Wait, wasn't he in the hospital when you posted that picnic picture? So you were worried about him, but you didn't visit him? This is confusing. Are you supporting him or celebrating without him?" The internet, bless its chaotic heart, turned on them harder than a pack of wolves on a wounded deer. Sponsors started dropping Felicity's boutique faster than she could delete comments. Clara's job put her on administrative review after someone forwarded the whole social media saga to her HR department. Robert got asked to leave a client meeting when someone brought up that viral thread about the family trying to scam their son-in-law. Their perfect facade didn't just crack, it shattered completely, right there in public view for everyone to see. And the best part? They'd done it to themselves. All I had to do was sit back and watch as their own lies caught up with them. As the internet's collective bullshit detector started working overtime, as their carefully crafted victim narrative fell apart under the weight of their own contradictions. Just when I thought Clara's family had exhausted their entire playbook of manipulation tactics, the guilt trips, the financial parasitism, the legal scheming, the public reputation assassination, they decided to pull out what I can only describe as their final boss move. It was like watching someone play their last card in a poker game, except instead of a royal flush, they were holding a joker, 2 threes, and a McDonald's coupon from 1987. I should have known something was coming when my discharge from the hospital went a little too smoothly. No dramatic last-minute appearances from Clara, no tearful reconciliation attempts, no final desperate phone calls from Robert about family loyalty and forgiveness. Just blessed silence from the Martinez clan while I packed up my few hospital belongings and prepared to start my new life as a man who controlled his own finances. It was almost peaceful, which should have been my first clue that the other shoe was about to drop. The letter arrived 3 days after I got home, delivered by certified mail because apparently this required a paper trail. The return address made my blood run cold. Robert Martinez, written in that old-school cursive handwriting that only men of his generation still used, like he was personally delivering a declaration of war from 1952. The envelope was thick, not just a single sheet, but multiple pages of what felt like official documentation. For a paranoid moment, I wondered if they'd found some new legal angle, some obscure law that would let them seize my assets or force me back into their financial web. But when I opened it, what I found was somehow even more psychologically twisted than any lawsuit could have been. It was a will. Robert's last will and testament, handwritten on legal letterhead and notarized like it was some kind of sacred document instead of a piece of emotional blackmail disguised as estate planning. The handwriting was shaky, whether from age, emotion, or just the sheer effort of crafting this particular piece of manipulation, I couldn't tell. The document itself was a work of art in the worst possible way. Robert had laid out the distribution of his estate, and I use that term loosely because the man's net worth was probably somewhere between negative 50,000 and absolutely fuck all, with the precision of someone dividing up the crown jewels instead of a suburban house that was already in foreclosure and a 2003 Honda with a check engine light that had been on since Obama's first term. But here's where it gets interesting. According to this newly drafted will, all remaining assets, the house they'd lost, the cars they couldn't afford, the imaginary inheritance that existed only in Robert's delusional mind, would go to the family members who maintained unity during times of crisis and stood together when others chose division. Family members who maintained unity. Let that sink in for a minute. In Robert's mind, enabling his family's financial irresponsibility was maintaining unity, while setting boundaries and refusing to be their personal ATM was choosing division. It was like living in some alternate reality where up was down, black was white, and fiscal responsibility was a character flaw. But the real kicker, the part that made me laugh so hard I nearly gave myself another cardiac event, was the final paragraph, written in ink that looked darker than the rest, like he'd pressed down extra hard to make sure his point was crystal clear. Until such time as he returns to the family and seeks proper reconciliation for the pain and division he has caused, my son-in-law shall receive nothing from this estate. Blood is thicker than water, but family unity is thicker than blood. When he chooses love over pride, he will be welcomed back into the fold with open arms and open hearts. Returns to the family, seeks proper reconciliation, the pain and division he had caused. This motherfucker was actually trying to make it sound like I was the one who'd abandoned them, like I was some prodigal son who'd wandered off and needed to come crawling back home with my tail between my legs and my checkbook in my hand. The beautiful irony was that Robert was trying to use inheritance as bait, the promise of future wealth to draw me back into their orbit. Except there was no wealth. The house was gone, foreclosed on because they'd been gambling with the mortgage payments. The cars were probably getting repossessed as I read his delusional document. Robert's estate consisted of debt, broken dreams, and a collection of get-rich-quick schemes that had never quite panned out. He was offering me nothing and calling it everything. He was dangling an empty carrot in front of a donkey who'd finally figured out he could walk away from the stick entirely. I read the whole thing twice, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from leftover cardiac medication. Nope, it was real. Robert had actually sat down, probably at that same kitchen table where they'd planned their guardianship scheme, and carefully crafted a document designed to make me feel like I was missing out on some grand inheritance if I didn't come crawling back to finance their lifestyle. The timing was perfect, too. This wasn't some document he'd had lying around for years. The date was fresh, written just days after their social media campaign had imploded in their faces. When the crying videos didn't work, when the public shaming backfired, when their reputation lay in tatters across the internet, Robert had decided to try one last manipulation. The promise of wealth that didn't exist, conditional on my return to financial servitude. It was like watching someone try to sell you a bridge they didn't own with money they didn't have while standing in a river they couldn't cross. The sheer audacity was almost admirable, if you could separate it from the complete moral bankruptcy that made it possible. I called Elias, because at this point he'd become my unofficial advisor on all things related to Martinez's family insanity, and read him the will over the phone. The silence that followed was so long I thought the call had dropped. "Grandpa? You still there?" "Son," he said finally, his voice carrying that particular mixture of amusement and disgust that only comes from witnessing something truly spectacular in its awfulness. "That man is trying to bribe you with nothing and call it something. So what do? You do exactly what you've been doing. You walk away. You let them keep their imaginary inheritance and their conditional love and their family unity that only exists when someone else is paying for it." But I knew there was more to it than just walking away. This will, this final manipulation, this last desperate attempt to make me feel like I was missing out on something valuable, it needed a response. Not the response they were hoping for, not a tearful phone call begging to be welcomed back into the family fold, but something that would make it crystal clear that their psychological games were over. That's when I made the call that would end this once and for all. Not to Robert, not to Clara, not to any of them. I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to file a permanent no-contact order against the entire Martinez family. No more phone calls, no more letters, no more certified mail documents full of manipulation disguised as legal paperwork. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I was cutting the last tie. I didn't want Robert's inheritance. I didn't want their conditional love. I didn't want their family unity that only existed when I was writing the checks. I wanted freedom, and finally, I was willing to pay the price for it. The day I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital for the last time, Elias was waiting for me in the parking lot with his ancient Toyota Camry, the kind of car that looks like it was built during the Carter administration but runs like it could outlast a nuclear winter. No fanfare, no dramatic music, no movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Just an old man in a worn leather jacket, leaning against a car that had seen better decades, ready to drive me toward whatever came next. "You ready for this?" he asked, loading my pathetic collection of hospital belongings into his trunk. A plastic bag full of get-well cards from co-workers who barely knew me, some clothes that smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams, and a folder full of legal documents that officially severed every tie between me and the people who'd spent 8 years treating me like their personal piggy bank. Ready as someone can be for starting over at 35 with nothing but a cardiac event and a newfound understanding of how shitty people can be. Elias chuckled and started the car, which made the kind of noise that suggested it was held together by prayer and spite, but somehow kept running anyway. "Son, you're not starting over with nothing. You're starting over without the wrong people. That's not the same thing." We drove past the city, past the suburbs where Clara and I had lived in our perfect little house with our perfect little mortgage and our perfectly fucked up relationship, past the strip malls and chain restaurants and all the familiar landmarks of a life I was leaving behind like a snake shedding its skin. The further we got from civilization, the easier it became to breathe, like the air itself was getting cleaner as we put distance between me and the disaster zone my marriage had become. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to actual trees and open space. It had been so long since I'd seen anything that wasn't concrete or asphalt that I'd almost forgotten what real nature looked like. "Place I found online," Elias said, navigating country roads like he'd been driving them his whole life. "Little cabin up in the mountains. Owner's looking to sell, but he's willing to rent it month to month while you figure things out. No neighbors close enough to borrow sugar from. No homeowners association telling you what color you can paint your mailbox. No drama for miles around. The mountains. I'd forgotten that places like this even existed. Places where your biggest concern was whether you had enough firewood for the winter instead of whether your sister-in-law was going to drain your business account to pay for her latest entrepreneurial fantasy. Places where silence was actually silent instead of filled with the constant buzz of anxiety and obligation and other people's emergencies. The cabin turned out to be everything Elias had promised and nothing like what I'd been expecting. It wasn't some luxury mountain retreat with granite countertops and a hot tub. It was just a simple, honest building that had been built to serve a purpose instead of to impress anyone. Log walls that had weathered decades of mountain winters. A front porch that looked like it had been designed for sitting and thinking rather than posing for Instagram photos. Windows that faced east toward the sunrise instead of toward the neighbor's judgment. "Jesus," I said, getting out of the car, and actually feeling my shoulders relax for the first time in months. It's perfect. Owner's name is Bill, Elias said, pulling my bags out of the trunk. Retired park ranger, lost his wife last year, decided he wanted to move closer to his kids in Florida. Says the place has good energy, whatever the hell that means. But he seemed like good people when I talked to him on the phone. Good people. I'd almost forgotten what that phrase meant after spending so many years surrounded by people who were very good at seeming good while slowly poisoning everything they touched. But standing there on that porch, looking out at mountains that couldn't be manipulated or guilted into providing money they didn't have, I started to remember what peace felt like. The inside of the cabin was just as honest as the outside. Hardwood floors that showed their age without apologizing for it. A stone fireplace that had clearly been used for actual warmth instead of just decoration. Furniture that prioritized comfort over style. The kitchen was small but functional. The kind of place where you could make real food instead of just heating up whatever you'd grabbed from the drive-thru between working overtime to pay other people's bills. But the best part, the part that made me understand why Elias had driven 3 hours to find this place, was the silence. Not the oppressive silence of people who aren't talking to each other, not the tense silence of waiting for the next crisis to explode, but actual, honest-to-God peaceful silence. The kind of quiet where you could hear yourself think for the first time in years. I talked to that tech company you applied to before all this shit went down, Elias said, settling into an armchair that looked like it had been broken in by decades of good conversations. They're still interested, and they're fine with you working remote. 40 hours a week instead of the 60 you were pulling before, better benefits, and nobody expects you to be available for emergencies at 3 in the morning. 40 hours a week. I'd forgotten that was even possible. For years, I'd been working every available hour, taking on extra projects and overtime shifts, not because I loved my job, but because someone always needed money for something. Felicity's boutique inventory, Robert's home improvement disasters, Clara's shopping habits that seemed to expand to fill whatever budget was available. I'd been living like a hamster on a wheel, running faster and faster to keep up with other people's spending. The salary's less than what you were making, Elias continued. But when you're not supporting 4 other adults and their various catastrophes, you'd be surprised how far money can stretch. That first night in the cabin, I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind mountains that had been there long before my marriage and would be there long after Clara had moved on to her next victim. I made dinner in a kitchen that was mine, in a house where nobody expected me to solve their problems or finance their dreams or apologize for having boundaries. For the first time in 8 years, I went to sleep without setting 17 alarms or making mental lists of whose crisis I'd need to handle the next day. I just slept, like a normal human being who wasn't responsible for everyone else's happiness and financial security. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through windows that faced the mountains instead of the neighbors' drama, and I could hear birds instead of text message notifications demanding immediate attention and financial assistance. Elias was already up, sitting on the porch with coffee and the newspaper, reading like someone who had all the time in the world because he'd learned the difference between urgent and important sometime around 1987. "Morning," I said, joining him on the porch with my own cup of coffee. Real coffee, not the emergency caffeine I'd been surviving on for years. "Sleep good, like the dead," which, considering recent events, probably isn't the best analogy. He laughed, and the sound carried across the mountains like it belonged there, like peace was something you could hear when you got far enough away from the people who confused love with exploitation. 6 months into my new life, I developed what you might call a routine, if routines could be built around the radical concept of not giving a damn about other people's manufactured emergencies. I woke up when my body felt like waking up instead of when my phone started buzzing with demands for immediate financial assistance. I drank my coffee while watching the sunrise paint the mountains different shades of gold and purple, instead of scrolling through text messages about whose rent was due or which bill had gone into collections this week. It was fucking glorious. The remote job had turned out to be everything Elias had promised and more. 40 hours a week of actual work instead of 60 hours of work plus 20 hours of crisis management for people who confused poor planning with bad luck. My new colleagues treated me like a professional instead of a human ATM, and my boss had this crazy idea that work-life balance was actually important for productivity. Revolutionary stuff, really. But the best part wasn't the job or the mountains, or even the cabin that had become more of a home in 6 months than the house I'd shared with Clara had been in 8 years. The best part was the silence in my head. For the first time since I'd gotten married, I wasn't constantly calculating who needed what money when. Wasn't mentally juggling payment schedules and credit limits and emergency funds for other people's poor decisions. That's not to say Clara's family had given up entirely. Oh no, these people had the persistence of cockroaches and about the same level of shame. Every few weeks, someone would test the boundaries of the no-contact order like they were probing for weaknesses in a fortress wall. Usually, it came through distant relatives who'd been recruited as flying monkeys. Cousin Patricia would call to chat about family news and somehow work in a mention of how devastated Clara was about our separation. Uncle Mike would send a Facebook message asking if I'd heard about Robert's latest health scare. Nothing serious, just a convenient excuse to reach out and remind me that family was important. Clara's college roommate would leave a voicemail about how worried she was about both of us and how maybe we could all get together for coffee to work things out. The manipulation was so transparent, it would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. These people had turned guilt-tripping into an art form, and they were throwing everything they had at the wall to see what would stick. The health scares, the financial emergencies, the carefully worded updates about how much they missed me and wanted me back in their lives. It was like watching a masterclass in emotional blackmail taught by people who'd never quite grasped that their student had graduated and moved on. My personal favorite was the Christmas card that somehow made it past my mail screening. A beautiful family photo. Clara, Felicity, Robert, Margaret, all gathered around a perfectly decorated tree in what looked like someone else's living room since they'd lost their house. Everyone was smiling those forced holiday smiles that probably took 47 takes to get right, and the caption inside read, "Wishing you peace and joy this holiday season. You're always in our thoughts and prayers. Love, the Martinez family." The Martinez family. Like they were some kind of brand instead of a collection of individuals who'd spent years treating me like their personal financial planning service. The audacity was breathtaking, really. They'd literally tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my money, and now they were sending me Christmas cards about love and prayers. I showed the card to Elias, who'd taken to spending most evenings on my porch, reading books and offering commentary on the various attempts to breach my psychological defenses. He looked at it for about 10 seconds, chuckled, and handed it back. "You know what this is, don't you?" he said. "Desperation disguised as holiday cheer? Bait. They're fishing, seeing if you'll bite. Seeing if maybe enough time has passed that you've forgotten why you left in the first place." But here's the thing, I hadn't forgotten. If anything, the distance had given me perspective on just how toxic that whole situation had been. Living without constant demands for money had shown me what financial security actually felt like. Sleeping through the night without worrying about whose crisis would wake me up next had reminded me what peace was supposed to be. Having conversations that weren't thinly veiled requests for financial assistance had helped me remember what actual human connection looked like. The latest attempt had come just last week, delivered through Clara's therapist of all people. Apparently, Clara had been seeing someone to work through the trauma of her marriage ending, because being cut off from someone else's bank account was apparently traumatic now, and the therapist had suggested that closure might be helpful for both of us. The therapist had called me directly, which should have been my first red flag. Professional boundaries aren't really that flexible, and therapists don't usually cold call their patients' estranged spouses to suggest family reunification sessions. But apparently, Clara had painted such a convincing picture of our marriage falling apart due to my health crisis and untreated trauma that this woman genuinely believed she was helping. "I understand you've been through a difficult time," the therapist had said, her voice carrying that particular blend of professional concern and personal judgment that only comes from getting one side of a very complicated story. "Clara has been working very hard to understand her role in the breakdown of your relationship, and she's made significant progress in therapy. She's hoping that you might be willing to participate in a joint session to work toward healing and closure." Healing and closure. Right. Because nothing says healing Quite like sitting in a room with someone who'd spent years financially exploiting you while a therapist who'd only heard their version of events tried to facilitate a reconciliation that would inevitably end with me writing checks again. I'd politely declined, explaining that I'd found my closure in the mountains and didn't need any additional healing beyond the kind that came from not being treated like a human credit card. The therapist had seemed genuinely surprised, like she couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to repair a relationship with someone who tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. But that's the beautiful thing about peace. Once you've actually experienced it, it becomes pretty easy to recognize all the things that threaten it. And Clara's family, with their manufactured emergencies and conditional love and expert-level manipulation skills, represented the exact opposite of everything I'd built for myself in these mountains. So I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. I threw away the cards without reading them. I blocked the numbers and emails and social media accounts, and when new ones popped up, I blocked those too. Because here's what I'd learned in 6 months of actual peace. You don't negotiate with emotional terrorists, you don't engage with people who confuse love with exploitation, and you sure as hell don't feel guilty about protecting the life you've built from people who want to tear it down for their own benefit. They could keep their story. They could tell anyone who'd listen about the heartless husband who'd abandoned his family during their time of need. They could play the victim until the end of time, posting their carefully curated tales of woe on social media and collecting sympathy from people who didn't know the whole truth. I had something better than their story. I had the truth, and the truth had given me peace. And peace, it turned out, was worth more than being loved by people who only loved me when I was useful.